Picture this, late 2013, a nondescript conference room in Los Angeles. Across the table sits Mark Zuckerberg, the man who already owns the conversation, who already swallowed Instagram for $1 billion in cash, who is sitting on a war chest large enough to buy entire countries. He has flown down from Menlo Park personally. That detail matters. Zuckerberg does not fly to other people fly to him. But this time he came south, because the kid he is about to make an offer to has already turned down lesser sums, and Zuckerberg has decided it's time to end this particular problem in person. $3 billion. Cash. No equity. No earnouts. No phased payouts. Just a wire transfer and the keys to a company that, at that moment, is barely 2 years old, has never made a single dollar in revenue, and is built around a feature that, by design, deletes itself. And on the other side of the table is a 23-year-old kid in a hoodie who 2 years earlier had been sleeping on a futon in his father's house in Pacific Palisades, presenting a class project to a Stanford product design course that one of his own classmates would later describe as the dumbest idea I'd ever heard. He looks at the most powerful executive in social media, the man who has built the biggest communications platform in human history, and he says no. No counteroffer. No request to think about it. No, let me talk to my board. Just no. And here's the part that still stops a person reading the dispositions years later. He didn't even seem nervous about it. Most people in his position would have signed. Most people in his position would have signed before lunch. He didn't. And the strangest part of this entire story, the part that almost nobody who scrolls past Snapchat on their phone understands, is that he was right. Not eventually right. Not philosophically right. Mathematically, financially, strategically right. The company he refused to sell for $3 billion in cash is now worth more than 10 times that amount. And the kid in the hoodie still controls every decision it makes. His name is Evan Spiegel, and the entire story of his life, every controversy, every lawsuit, every product, every disaster, every comeback, is at heart a story about one habit: the audacity of the no. To understand how a 23-year-old summons the nerve to reject a number with 9 zeros in it, you have to go backward. Way backward. Past the Stanford fraternity, past the Peekaboo prototype, past even the divorce that became a minor legal celebrity moment in Los Angeles in 2007, when his parents' custody dispute spilled into public records because both parents had hired such expensive lawyers that the documents themselves became a kind of accidental memoir of West Side privilege. You have to go all the way back to the BMW. When Evan Spiegel turned 16, his father, a partner at one of the most prestigious law firms in Los Angeles, bought him a BMW 325i. Not extraordinary in that particular zip code. What was extraordinary was what happened a year later when Evan informed his father that the car wasn't sufficient anymore. He wanted a Cayenne, a Porsche Cayenne. His father, John, who had himself worked his way up from middle-class Connecticut, said no. So Evan moved out. He moved into his mother's house, Melissa, also a Yale-educated attorney, where the answer was apparently different. Within months, the Cayenne was in the driveway. Now you can read that story as the most insufferable origin tale in modern Silicon Valley. A lot of people have, and that's a fair reading. But there's another reading, and it's the one that explains everything that came afterward. The lesson that 17-year-old Evan absorbed in that household was not about cars, it was about leverage. He learned that if you don't like the answer the world is giving you, you find a structural alternative. You don't argue, you don't sulk. You find a different table with different rules where the answer comes out the way you want it to. That single insight, refined and sharpened over the next 15 years, becomes the operating system behind every major decision he ever makes. He ends up at Stanford. He pledges Kappa Sigma. By every account from people who were there, he is exactly the kind of person you would expect to find in that fraternity in 2010. Confident, well-dressed, a little chilly, the kind of person who already knows where he is going and is mildly impatient with people who don't. He meets a senior named Reggie Brown one night, sometime in the spring of 2011. Reggie, by the way, is the one with the original idea. This part the lawsuits are very clear about. Reggie walks into Evan's room one evening and says something like, "I wish there was an app where the photos disappeared." Evan looks up, and here's where the story bends, because most people in that moment hear a casual thought and forget it by morning. Evan hears the same sentence and immediately understands what nobody else in the room understands, that the entire architecture of social media to date has been built on the wrong assumption. The assumption that everything you do should be permanent, everything saved, everything searchable, everything stored, indexed, monetized forever. What if it wasn't? Within 48 hours, he has pulled in his roommate Bobby Murphy, a quiet engineer from Berkeley, to start coding. The original app is called Peekaboo. The first logo, hand-drawn by the brother of one of Evan's roommates, is a smiling ghost named Ghostface Chilla, a reference to the Wu-Tang Clan rapper, which tells you something about the cultural register of the founding moment. They launch in July of 2011. The professor Scott Cook, the founder of Intuit, a billionaire in his own right, sitting in on Evan's class as a guest, is the only adult in the entire ecosystem who tells him it might be something. Everyone else laughs. Why would you build an app that throws away its own content? That's not a feature. That's a bug. And here is where the audacity of the no makes its first appearance, in a form so small that almost nobody noticed it at the time. Evan said no to the entire premise of social media as it had been understood up to that moment. He said no to permanence, no to the feed, no to the photo album as the organizing metaphor of online life. He said the camera, not the keyboard, is the next interface. And in that single rejection, quiet, almost throwaway, was the seed of every product Snap would ever ship. Then comes the betrayal, or the alleged betrayal, depending on whose deposition you're reading. Reggie Brown, the original idea haver, gets pushed out, cut from the cap table, cut from the company, cut from the email chain. By 2012, he's hired lawyers and is suing for his share. The case settles in 2014 for $157 million. $157 million to a person who, by that point, has been gone from the company for over 2 years. That number alone tells you how scared Snap's lawyers were of what would have come out at trial. And this is the first real test of what kind of operator Evan is. Because most founders, faced with a co-founder lawsuit at age 22, fold. He doesn't. He fights. He keeps building. The app passes 10 million daily users while the lawsuit is still active. Then 20 million. Then 50. By the time the case settles, Snapchat has become the single most important communication app for American teenagers under the age of 18. Not Instagram, not Facebook, Snapchat, and Mark Zuckerberg has noticed, which brings us back to that conference room. November of 2013, $3 billion, the largest acquisition offer ever made for a company that young, that small with that little revenue. Zuckerberg, by all accounts, expected the answer to be yes. What he didn't understand, what almost nobody outside Spiegel's tiny circle understood, was that the offer itself was, to Evan, almost an insult. Not because the number was small, the number was enormous, but because the offer was being made by someone who, by definition, did not believe in what Snapchat was actually trying to do. If Zuckerberg had truly understood the bet, that the camera would replace the keyboard, that ephemerality would replace permanence, that mobile first meant something completely different from what Facebook was building, he would not have offered $3 billion. He would have offered 30. Or he wouldn't have offered at all because he would have been too busy trying to figure out how to compete. And here's the part that's almost impossible to believe. After Evan said no, Zuckerberg, in a meeting that has since been described in multiple memoirs and corporate histories, allegedly said something close to, "Now we're going to destroy you." And then he went back to Menlo Park and tasked his entire product organization with a single mission: build whatever Snapchat builds and build it inside Instagram. 2.5 years later, in August of 2016, Instagram launches Stories. Same vertical format, same disappearing after 24 hours mechanic, same camera first interface, the most powerful copycat in the history of the industry, deployed against a company a fraction of its size by a man who had personally been told no. Now, pause on that for a second, Because if you're listening to this and you've already made up your mind that the rejection of $3 billion was a mistake, this is the moment most people would agree with you. Snap's user growth slows almost the second stories launches inside Instagram. Investors panic. Analysts write obituaries. The company goes public in March of 2017 at a valuation of $24 billion, more than the entire annual revenue of every Hollywood studio combined that year, and then watches its stock collapse over the following 12 months, losing more than two-thirds of its value. By the end of 2018, Snap is trading at less than $5 a share. People who bought at the IPO are underwater. The financial press is writing the eulogy. And if you stop the story right there, $3 billion in cash looks like the deal of the century, and Evan Spiegel looks like the most expensive arrogance in the history of Silicon Valley. But the story doesn't stop there. And before we go further into what happens next, into the comeback that almost nobody outside the industry actually noticed. If you've made it this far and you're still listening, I'd ask you to do one small thing. Subscribe to the channel. Hit the like button. We tell stories about how power and stubbornness actually intersect, about the kind of decisions that look insane in real time and inevitable in retrospect. And we can only keep telling them if the people who care about this kind of story make themselves known. So if you're one of those people, and the fact that you're still here suggests you are, make it official. Now back to the table. The audacity of the no shows up again, harder, in 2017. Snap is preparing to go public. Their bankers come to them with the standard advice. You issue voting shares. The public buys voting shares. That's how the system has worked for over 100 years. Evan listens, and then he does something that no major company in American history had ever done before. He goes public with shares that have literally zero voting rights for public shareholders. None. Zero. The public can buy the stock. They can ride the stock up or down, but they cannot vote on a single thing the company does. Every meaningful voting share is held by Evan and Bobby Murphy. Two people in their 20s holding absolute control over a company that millions of investors are about to put their savings into. The institutional investors are furious. Index funds threaten to refuse to include Snap in their indices. Governance scholars write op-eds calling it a betrayal of public market norms. And Evan does not care, because the entire structure was built around the same question that has organized his life from the BMW onward. Who gets to decide what this company is? You or the market? And his answer, every single time, is me. This is what people miss when they reduce his story to privilege or arrogance or luck. The audacity of the no is not a personality trait. It is a worldview. It is the strategic conviction that the moment you let other people decide what your company is worth, you have already lost the ability to build the company you actually want to build. $3 billion in 2013 would have killed Snapchat. Not as a product. Facebook would have kept it running, the way they kept Instagram running. But as a company with its own logic, its own taste, its own willingness to ship a thing called spectacles in a vending machine on Venice Beach, because that's how the founder thought it should be launched. As a company, as a worldview, as a bet on what the next interface is. Now the dark parts, because the story doesn't get told honestly without them. In 2014, Gawker publishes a series of leaked emails from Evan's Stanford fraternity days. The emails are exactly what you would expect from a privileged white kid in a fraternity in 2010. Crude, sexist, juvenile. Evan apologizes. The apology is reasonable, but the emails are real, and they are part of the record, and they are part of who he was at 20. Anyone telling this story without acknowledging that is selling you a coronation, not an investigation. There is also, by multiple accounts, a moment in an internal expansion meeting around 2018, when the question of expanding Snapchat aggressively into India and other emerging markets came up. And Evan reportedly said something close to, "This app is just for rich people. I don't want to expand into poor countries like India and Spain." He has denied saying it in those exact words. The lawsuit in which the quote surfaced was eventually settled. But whether or not the words were exactly that, The strategy that followed was unmistakable. Snap, for years, deprioritized growth in lower revenue geographies. And that decision had real consequences when emerging market growth became the entire story of every other social platform. These are not small things. They are part of the picture. But here's the strange thing about the audacity of the no, and why the story doesn't end with the IPO collapse. Because in 2018, while the financial press was writing the obituary, Snap was quietly doing something the press was not paying attention to. They were rebuilding the camera. They were investing in augmented reality at a scale that, at that moment, almost nobody else in the industry was matching. Spectacles, the camera glasses launched in 2016, initially mocked as a vanity project, written off after huge inventory write-downs, were quietly becoming the foundation of an entire AR strategy that by 2024 would have over 300 million daily users interacting with augmented reality features. Snap, the company everyone had buried, was reaching more 13 to 24-year-olds in the United States than Instagram and TikTok combined. A fact that gets lost every time the financial press writes Snap's obituary, and it has written several. By 2026, Snap is sitting on roughly 450 million daily active users. Its market capitalization, after years of volatility, is firmly in the tens of billions. It is profitable, on a non-GAAP basis, for the first sustained period in its history. Spiegel still controls every meaningful vote. He is still in Los Angeles. He is still refusing to play the Silicon Valley press game. He is still saying no. Speaking of which, before we close this out, drop a comment and tell me, would you have taken the $3 billion? Honestly, at 23 with no track record, no profitable business, no guarantee that the audacity would ever pay off, would you have signed? Most people would. And here's the thing about the audacity of the no, the thing that separates Evan from almost everyone else who has ever sat across that table from a buyer with a checkbook. Most founders, when they get the offer, calculate downside. What if I don't sell and the company fails? What if I don't sell and a bigger company crushes us? What if I don't sell and the moment passes? The downside calculation is what sells most companies, most of the time. Evan calculated the other direction. What if I sell and the thing I am building is actually right? What if the entire premise, that the camera replaces the keyboard, that ephemerality is the future, that mobile first means something Facebook will never understand, is correct, and I just handed it to someone who will run it into the ground because they don't believe in it? That is a fundamentally different question. And once you ask it that way, $3 billion is not a number. It is a referendum on whether you still believe in your own product. The disappearing message in the end was never just a feature. It was a metaphor, a bet that permanence is the lie, not the default. That the things that matter are the things that vanish. The conversation, the glance, the moment. Most companies are built on the opposite premise. Save everything, index everything, monetize the archive. Snapchat was built on the opposite, and the founder of Snapchat lived by the opposite. Every offer he refused was a thing that vanished. Every share with no vote attached was a refusal of the archive. Every product launched in a vending machine was a refusal of the press cycle. The company is the man, and the man is the principle, and the principle is the no. The ghost on the logo, by the way, is named Ghostface Chilla. He has been declared dead more times than any major social platform of the last 15 years. He keeps coming back. There is a kind of poetry in that, if you look at it the right way. A company built around things that disappear, run by a man who keeps refusing to disappear himself. So here's the question the story leaves you with. In an industry where the dominant strategy has always been to copy, where Instagram copied stories and TikTok copied the algorithm, and every platform eventually becomes every other platform. What is actually left when everyone has copied you? Maybe this, the audacity of the no, the willingness at 23 to look across the table at the most powerful man in your industry and decide that the price he is offering is not a number at all. It is a statement about how much he understands what you are building. And if the answer is not enough, then you say no, and you keep building, and you let the next 12 years prove who was right. Evan Spiegel said no. He said it in a Stanford classroom when his classmates laughed. He said it in a conference room when Zuckerberg flew down. He said it on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange when the bankers told him to issue voting shares. He said it again and again and again. And the strangest, most unlikely, most inconvenient part of the whole story is that every single time he turned out to be right. Or at least, right enough that the company is still his, which in this industry, in this era, with these stakes, might be the only definition of winning that actually matters.